So we'll be in 2 Kings chapters 6 and 7. We're going to talk about good news, sharing good news. That is essentially what this story is all about. It's all about sharing. We've got these four lepers as our central characters, and they're really an interesting group of people. They are in this situation where they've got nothing to lose. They've got a sieged city, famine going on, they've got leprosy, and then the enemy surrounding them. So they got nothing to lose. And so sure enough, they do go out. They find that God has done this amazing work, that God has caused this stir, God has caused the enemy to leave, and they find all of this stuff: food, money, clothing. And when they first start to experience this, they take for themselves. They take for themselves, and then they go and they hide the stuff that they find. And then they go to the next tent, and they take some stuff, and then they go hide. And then one of them speaks up and says, guys, this is not right. If we just keep all of this to ourselves, something bad is going to happen to us. We have got some good news, and we need to share it. We have got some good stuff. We need to share it. All of this started with just having an idea of creating a preaching calendar and then asking everybody, what are your favorite Bible stories? Let's just start with that. Let's go through, let's take a year and let's just preach through the Word and preach people's favorite Bible stories. So people submitted their stories in different ways. This was my submission. It's a little gruesome, but it's also, I remember hearing this story in like the second or third grade, and it just seemed so neat to me. These outcasts, the people that weren't allowed in the city, the people that had every reason to feel justified in finding this treasure and keeping it all for themselves, and yet in discovering it, just felt so compelled that we can't keep this to ourselves, we have to share it. And that stuck with me. And then as we kind of put these stories together that people said, for some reason, the way that these 4 or 5 stories, and we're going to do them a little out of chronological order, but the way that they came together just seemed to fit so well. This idea of going the extra mile, just doing the extra thing. So last week, Debbie and Jack kind of got kicked off with the storytelling and the preaching of the story of Ruth, and how Ruth went the extra mile for her family. And that when she was in there and when she moved to Israel, that the people there, she gained a reputation amongst them, that they talked about her and said, she's done so much for her mother-in-law. She was a woman who went the extra mile for her family, a quality that we want to emulate. What we learned from these lepers is that these guys, they went the extra mile for their neighbors. And that's kind of the theme today. In the next couple of weeks, we're going to look at David and Jonathan and how we should go the extra mile for our friends. We're going to look at Naaman, how he had a couple of servants that really said things, either, opened doors for him or said things that he needed to hear. We're going to talk about going the extra mile for your coworkers. And then we're going to go back in the beginning of chapter 6 here. We're going to see something that happens with Elisha and the Arameans. And we're going to talk about going the extra mile for your enemies. I'm really excited about how all of these fit in. And really, as Christians, that's what we want to be known for, right? Not people that do the bare minimum. That church, they're so great. They only do what they have to do to squeak by. We want to be known for going the extra mile, for doing the extra thing, for that kind of, that when somebody thinks about you, they think, wow, she does so much for her mother-in-law. Why? It's because of her relationship that she's got with God, because of the connection she's got with Jesus Christ. Just this morning in Bible class, we talked about, what are you grateful for? Marge Piper raises her hand. She says, I'm grateful for my husband. So, well, what in particular are you grateful for about Richard? And she just started listing all of these things that she's grateful for about Richard. She said, she stopped and said, I can keep going if you want me to. Right? That's what we're talking about. That's the kind of people we want to be. That's the kind of relationships we want to be having. And that's the kind of good news that we want to be sharing. That is good news to me. It's good news to me that people can be married for almost 60 years and still love each other. And still, when they say, what are you grateful for? They raise their hand, they say, I'm grateful for my husband. I'm grateful for my wife. That it's not old, that they're not sick of each other, that they are not bored with each other, that they're not like, I can't stand it when he chews ice. But they say, I'm so grateful for this person, right? That's the kind of good news that we have and that we can share. Now, that's what I really want to focus on with these people here. I'm just going to go ahead and read that little section starting in chapter 7 and verse 8 of 2 Kings. If you're there, you can follow along with me. It says, the men who had leprosy reached the edge of the camp, entered one of the tents, and ate and drank. Then they took silver, gold, and clothes and went off and hid them. They returned and entered another tent and took some things from it and hid them also. Then they said to each other, what we are doing is not right. This is a day of good news, and we are keeping it to ourselves. If we wait until daylight, punishment will overtake us. Let us go at once and report this to the royal palace. Good news. Good news. It is our responsibility, those of us who have good news, it's our responsibility to share that good news. That is the lesson. That is how I believe we can really actually, in the best way, go the extra mile for our neighbors. To understand, and Greg mentioned the desperation of the times. And so we'll look back at chapter 6 and see just how bad things were. Chapter 6 and verse 26 says, as the king of Israel was passing by on the wall, a woman cried out to him, help me, my lord and king. The king replied, if the Lord does not help you, where can I get help for you? From the threshing floor, from the winepress? Then he asked her, what's the matter? And she answered, this woman said to me, give up your son so we may eat him today, and tomorrow we'll eat my son. So we cooked my son and ate him. The next day I said to her, give up your son so we may eat him. But she had hidden him. What's the hungriest you've ever been? Right? Have you ever been so hungry that you can even imagine cooking one of your children? These 4 lepers stumble upon some really good news. It's not just good news that the enemies left. It's not just good news that they left a bunch of stuff. The backdrop of the good news is so intense and so unimaginable to us, right? That someone was so hungry and so desperate that they were willing to enter into a pact with somebody else and let their own child die so that they could be fed. That is the bad news. That is the reality of their world. It was the reality of their situation. And so these lepers, they've got good news. How compelled are they to say, what we're doing is wrong? We can't just come to tent, eat and drink and be merry and grab these things and hide them for ourselves. Even if we wait until the morning to share this with everybody else, we have to go. Why? Because people are eating their babies. People are eating their own children. That's how desperate people are. And if they were doing that, who knows what other kinds of things were going on in the city. So they were compelled to share the good news. So they go back to the city and they tell the people in the city, they tell the kings and the king's people, the officers, about what's going on. So sure, there was some reluctance there, and they did what they had to do. But here's some things that did not happen. Okay, well, the top 10 things that the lepers did not say on their way back to the city. This is going to be really awkward to share this good news with the people that are really close to me. Right? Not something they probably said. What if the Israelites reject us? Right? What else would make the top 10 list? Anybody have any ideas? Yeah. Oh, they're probably not interested in this good news. All of this food, the money, the clothing. They've got other things going on in their lives, right? They're probably too busy. They won't want to hear this good news.
They probably don't feel as though they need it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they won't need this. Right? These are things that the lepers did not say on the way back to the city, right? And who knows, I don't know what their physical state was. In my mind, I can imagine them, once they're convicted, that they need to go and share the good news, that they didn't just mosey on over to the city, that there was probably smiles on their faces, excitement in their gaits, that they could not wait to get to share this good news. The responsibility was not how the people would react, because you would think people are so desperate that they would just be overjoyed and say, yay! But of course, we're people, and this is probably a good reaction by the king and his men. Well, is this a trap? We don't want to get too excited over nothing. But that wasn't the leper's responsibility, and that's what I want to encourage us today when we think about sharing the good news with our neighbors and going the extra mile for them in that way, is actually sharing the gospel with them, is I want to encourage you to think about your only responsibility is sharing the good news. How your neighbors react to that good news is not your responsibility. And it should be, if it really is good news, it should be easy and natural. One of my favorite parables lately has been from Matthew chapter 13. Got it. Very short couple of parables, verses 44 and 45. The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field. When a man found it, he hid it again, and then in his joy went and sold all he had and bought the field. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant looking for fine pearls. When he found one of great value, he went away and sold everything he had and bought it. When they found it, when they found the kingdom of heaven, it was so great to them, it was so amazing to them, that they were willing to give up everything for it and sell everything for it. And now this parable doesn't go on to say, and then they told everybody about it. But we see that in some of the other teachings, right? Of the lost sheep and the lost coin and the lost son. When those things and when those people return, when I find the sheep, when I find the coin, or when the person in the story finds the coin, what do? They call all of their neighbors and they throw a party. The woman who had the tiny little coin that was hardly worth anything, that she swept her house all day to find it, probably didn't have enough money to throw a party, but threw a party anyway, because it was good news. The shepherd who left the 99 to chase after the one that left, when he finds it, throws it over his back, comes back, calls all of his friends and neighbors and says, I've got good news. I lost a sheep, but I found it. Let's celebrate. The father whose son rejects him and who leaves and takes his inheritance and goes away and squanders it, but then comes back. When the father sees the boy from far off, he runs to him. He's weeping tears of joy. He's ecstatic. It's good news. Seeing his son return, it's good news to him, and he's excited about it. And he wants to share it, not just with the family and the servants, but with the whole town. So they kill the fattened calf. How much does a fat calf weigh? I think this is a big chunk of meat. They're feeding a lot of people. All right. Now, this party is not for 20 people. This is like a couple, some 100 people coming to this party. They got a lot of meat going on. It's good news, and he wants to share it. And when we have really good news, it's just a natural thing to share. And we found out that Cassie was pregnant, and we came in here, was doing sharing and caring. One mic, I think, I can't remember which one initially raised their hand. My mom is pregnant, right? And then last week, it's a girl. You know, it's just because they have got this good news welling up in their heart, and they're like, can we say? Can we share it? Can we say? You know, we're like, go ahead. My prayer for us is that when we think about what Jesus does for us, when we think about what God has done for us in our lives, that would well up in us a sense of good news, that we would want to share that with people. That holding it in, we would think, this is not right for me. It's not right for me to live in my neighborhood and to have all of these neighbors and to have what I have. To have the relationship that I have with God, to have the wisdom and knowledge that comes from having His Spirit dwell inside of me, from having this beautiful gift of the Holy Scriptures that I can, anytime I want to, look and just gain from them wisdom and insight into this world and right living and better living, that Jesus came to give me life and abundant life, and the thief has come to break in and steal. And so I have good news, and so it should be something that we share naturally. And so point one, I guess, if we're going to do that, is you've got good news. You have got good news. Point two is we live in a world that stinks. We live in a terrible, terrible world. Okay, now maybe your neighbors aren't eating their babies. I hope not. But their life stinks. And I'm not saying that in a judgy way, like, we've got Jesus, we're better than everybody else. Not like that. But as a reality, the people that are living around you, they are hurting. There's something going on. And so I don't want you to have a better than you, holier than thou attitude when it comes to your neighbors, but we definitely can have an attitude of, I don't know what you're going through, but I know there's something. I heard a preacher once talk about storms in life. And he said, there's only one of a couple of truths, is either you just got through a storm, or you're in the middle of a storm, or there's a storm coming. One of those three in life, that's how life is. We live in a world where people eat their babies. It's that bad. It might not be that bad for your neighbors, but it's that bad. And things are bad. And we've got good news. Let's share the good news. Let's know that we've got good news. And if you don't feel compelled, then that's maybe a question and a challenge. Do you really have the good news? There's really two things that in play with these lepers. There's two things. Either they didn't really stumble upon what they stumbled upon, and it was a mirage, and they deceived themselves, and then they figured that out, and they said, oh, you know what, this isn't really that big of a deal. We shouldn't go back and tell anybody. There's only enough for a couple people here. Or their hearts would have never had that conviction, and they would have been filled with greed and desire to just have it all for themselves. Those are the only two things that really would have kept them from sharing that good news. But when it's really genuinely good news, you just share it. And you let chips fall as they may. You let other people make the decision on how they're going to respond to that. Because the people in the city, if they just want to blanket say, no way, that's a trick, that's a trap, we're not going out, we're not going to check it out, that's their own fault. We've got some good news. Now, the last thing I want to say is that your good news, obviously, in the big picture, the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ. The good news is that we're sinners, the bad, and we've been saved by Christ. The good news is that we've been separated by God, but that Jesus reconciles us and puts us back together with Him. So that is the hope that we have, is that all of the bad news in this world somehow, can be reconciled through Christ. We can always have that hope in Christ, and that's something that we can share with people. But we also live in a world that your good news can be, I want to encourage you when you think about sharing the good news, I want you to share the gospel with your neighbors. I want you to go the extra mile and share the gospel with your neighbors this week. But I also want you to think about the other good news that you have. I want you to think about how great your marriage is. I want to think about how great your children are. I want you to think about the blessings that you have in Christ. I want you to think about the earthly blessings that you have and share those with your neighbors. That all of these things are good news. All of these things are good news. But people will react differently. Cassie's pregnant. Oh, they're going to have another kid? Is their house big enough for that? Do they make enough money for that? Are they going to ask us for more stuff? Are they going to have another baby shower? You know, sure. Some of you are grumpy people. I forgive you. You know, that happens. But it's our good news, so what are we going to do? Just keep it quiet? You're going to figure it out eventually. And hopefully your neighbors will figure it out eventually too. Don't keep it a secret. Don't wait until your neighbors see you fully pregnant and say, hey, what's going on with you? Share your good news. The life all around us, the world around us is not a good place. There's lots of ways that we can go the extra mile for our neighbors. There's lots of things in the Word that give us those things. My encouragement for you, and you've got a notes section in your bulletin on the back, write out a couple of things before you leave today. Write the name of one of your neighbors, somebody that lives in your vicinity, somebody that you know that you could share something with, share the good news with. And write down underneath that, what is your good news? What's your good news today? We've got the gospel. That's priority number one. We want to share the gospel with somebody. But you've got some good news. There's something good happening in your life. There's something that you're excited about. And if you're in Christ, at some point, that's going to tail back to Him. Write that down. Share your good news. Go the extra mile for your neighbor.